Hello and welcome back to another episode of From the Field. I am Casey Orr. I am a solution architect located out in Wellington, New Zealand, which is quite exciting. And anyone that did actually manage to quickly catch a glimpse of that intro, which I hope is no one because it still has the horrendous bug where it says we're starting at the top of the hour, if anyone hasn't noticed, or you're located in Perth. That is not quite the truth. So that is going to be the last time you see that intro. I was actually working furiously to try to get the new intro in for this show, but unfortunately, the whole was it the whole workflow and everything like that kind of froze my browser and crashed it. So and I have to start all over again. So that's always a fun time. I'm a tragic man. Hi, Roger. Nice to see you on stream. Yeah, my life is full of those weird instances where things lock up on me and break, and I'm just like, oh, why? Why does this have to happen? It's even worse when you forget to hide slides. Cool, and enough about me. We have an awesome change to our format today. We're trying out and experimenting with new things. So we normally do a lot more of a presentation type angle, but in this one we are deciding to actually head down much more of like a pod chart type thing, and we're just going to be two professionals here, talking about our own opinions, anything like that as we go through it. Seb, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, cool. Yeah, cheers. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Casey. Thanks for having me on the show, man. It's pretty cool. So I'm, from the field. So I'm an AWS solution architect as well. I'm a principal SA in our Wellington SA practice. So I've been with AWS for almost a year, and yeah, just excited to be on the show with Casey. So yeah, a bit of a different format. So it's cool. Hey, Casey, you said at the beginning, there's a bug in the intro, but the music was cool, man. I definitely dig the music.
It's true. The 5 minute one will actually lies to you for 5 minutes, and that we're saying at top of the hour. That one has even better music because it actually gets faster and faster as it gets closer to the time. So it's kind of like uses the sound tempo as well. And I really like the last 5 minutes because it gets really fast paced and heats up.
People might be having like a nervous fit because the music's going so fast. It's like the blood pressure keeps going up. You're like, oh,
yeah. And then they hyped up, and then I start talking. Yeah. There's been a couple of times where we've actually started and I've been muted and trying to introduce myself while muted. Pro tip, that doesn't really work. It's good if you've been a mime show, but beyond that, not really.
Yeah, cool, man. Anyway, thanks for having me on the show, man.
Yeah, no problem. So I think we're going for and we're exploring the mega trends. There's quite a few mega trends in the industry now where, it's just, ClickOps and all of those big terms. Like I went to a conference locally was all about, DevOps. And I think I got introduced to DevOps at least 8 times throughout the day, which was quite an experience. But, the sustainability, definitely from a New Zealand point of view, because, New Zealand's all about stack green, the green image that we have and everything like that, but and we have all of these carbon credits and everything like that, but isn't sustainability at the end of the day just careful accounting from the business angle? And this is just talking about business in general, right?
Yeah, cool. So yes, let's have a bit of a yarn on these sort of mega trends. It's tragic if we associate the mega trends with ambiguous terms, of course, but I am keen to just explore the sustainability angle a little bit. You get these terms like greenwashing and all this sort of stuff in there, and it puts quite a negative lens on the whole thing. And it's actually quite, it's a bit tragic to just scream doom and gloom. We kind of want to highlight actually the good side of how we might be able to, take a more of a sustainable lens on top of architecture, because we're architects, Casey, you and me. We're the SAs at AWS. So what do we look at when we discuss sustainability and try to see how we can really push that forward? And I think the main thing is that we've got this term green architecture, and it kind of isn't really clear what the heck that is. Green, what does that mean? We have blue green architectures, blue green deployments, or whatever. But essentially, what it comes down to is that we want to have environmental architecture, and that actually is a phrase or a term that comes out of the more traditional physical architecture, which is structural engineering kind of architecture. And the whole idea that, for example, you could have a building that has a lot of plants on the side, and so therefore it produces, it essentially absorbs the carbon that the building produces itself. So then you have an environmentally friendly building, for example. And we can do the same thing within our tech architectures as well, because of course tech is actually one of big producer of carbon, of our carbon footprint. And there's actually some really interesting ones that I thought we could sort of have a bit of a yarn about. One aspect that we look a lot at from an Amazon perspective is actually introducing new hardware and finding ways of building hardware that is actually more energy efficient. And that's a really big part, because of course, you can reduce your carbon footprint if you consume less energy. So how do we look at consuming less energy? Well, we actually need to look at different kind of hardware. And so, Graviton, for example, is one where things are quite, that's actually, I think I read a phrase somewhere that it was the most energy efficient CPU on the market currently. So that hardware thing is a really important one. But then also the software side of things. I recently read a fascinating article on the different energy consumption of different programming languages. And Perl, I don't know how many of our viewers still remember Perl. Perl used to be kind of a big thing. There was the whole Perl mongers and all that. And I certainly was into that for quite a while when I was
I remember watching someone made a Perl script to solve Sudoku, and it was just one line of plus minus and all this random gibberish. I'm like, I don't understand any of this.
Yeah. There used to be the Perl obfuscation competition. I don't know if you remember that one, but there was some crazy stuff out there where people came out. It was like Perl one-liners, and you had to kind of obfuscate a hello world. I think it was a hello world thing. Anyways, it's great fun. We got a comment here. Perl was the first language I used to program CGI scripts. Yes, Common Gateway Interface. Man, that takes us back. That was when tech was still easy. We got so much float in our tech stack these days. So yeah, you missed that show too. Well, as it turns out, Perl is the most energy ineffective or the energy consuming programming language out there. And this article had 100 languages. And it listed Perl way down the bottom, and it was somewhere 4,000 times as energy hungry as C++ or C or one of these compiled languages. So that's pretty crazy. And I don't think we as engineers and software engineers, programmers, we think about that enough, right? The choice of language can actually impact a lot about your energy consumption, right? So
most developers choose the first language they get introduced into, right? And the very first language that they get a job in, and that becomes their precious child. Well, we fight to the death over. No one can beat our first programming language that we're the best in.
Yeah. Well, I think the big takeaway that I wanted to share with our viewers is actually that when you move into a compiled language, so away from interpreted languages into compiled language, so for example Golang or Java to a degree. Java is a very efficient language as well, but C++, you get incredible energy efficiency ratios. And I think maybe one of the very popular languages that we see at the moment is Rust, and Rust as a language is incredibly energy efficient. So if you were to run a Rust stack on top of a Graviton processor, you'd probably actually find that the same amount of business logic would produce a far less carbon footprint. So yeah, mega fascinating kind of space. Casey, you still there? You're frozen a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just checking. My camera has decided that it really wants to not play ball. Remember my earlier comment about the fact that it likes to get stuck on things. Let's try my other camera.
Yeah, cool, man.
This is my life. I just managed to break technology by existing. It's quite a skill.
Yeah, just your presence alone breaks the tech, man. I tell you what, it's these gremlins in the network, right?
Let's see if I can switch back and that will fix it.
While you do that, there's this greenwashing phrase out there, and that's super super controversial actually. And I've just been hearing just in my day-to-day conversations with customers that this term greenwashing is coming up a lot more frequently, and in a way that's quite concerning, I think, because it puts a negative spin on something that is actually super critical that we need to address. I mean, bloody hell, in Wellington we've just had so many landslides because of the phenomenal rain that we've just had here, and I'm we got to do something here. We can't just sit back and say, well, carbon credits are the answer either, right? So just, I mean, looking at it kind of from a devil's advocate kind of point, right? The whole idea of carbon credits, the way that I understand them at least, is that you buy the credits that essentially are removing carbon from our atmosphere, and then therefore you kind of counterbalance the carbon that you produce itself. So the classic example is you go buy a flight, you go Air New Zealand, go and book a flight from Auckland to Wellington. Would you like to pay the $3.50 extra to buy these carbon credits? And that, to me, I don't understand, like, how is that really going to make a heck of a lot of difference, or are we kind of just creating a fancy accounting system to almost legitimize the carbon footprint that we're burning, therefore almost having the counter effect that we're going to use more carbon because it's okay. So therefore we're not frugal with our energy consumption anymore. I find that really concerning.
And we also have the other physical aspect of that, where even in New Zealand, we got our renewable energy all pretty much all around, but the large chunk of renewable energy is generated down in the South Island. But the large chunk of electricity usage is used in the North Island. So during the flow of electricity up. So what we do is when you buy green energy, you essentially go to one of the distributors and be like, hey, I want to buy a chunk of green energy. But you are essentially buying generation down in the South Island and shipping it all the way to North. What means that, that there's a lot of loss there. So really, you're never actually consuming the energy from the South Island most of the time. At most, they will head into the Wellington region. Will never actually get to Auckland. Because by the time it gets to Auckland, there won't really be much energy left. It's a very inefficient use of it. So,
what you think it goes missing just by way of being on the wire, essentially?
So it's kind of like the term that with the fact that because you have reserved that cost of that energy, even though you're not actually the one that consuming that energy, you're essentially causing a reason, like an economic reason or incentive for that generation to happen, and then the people around it will consume the energy. But at the end of the day, your energy needs are still going to be met by Huntly, most likely, if you're in the North Island, or one of the lesser clean energy sources. But by you actually buying that, and through that clever accounting, as we'd call it, you are still actually causing that green energy to be created down south and to be utilized by the South Island business or farmers, or most likely.
Well, I think the whole sort of buying and selling market of these carbon credits, there's a way to kind of game the system, right? So like one example I recently read about was a company that's, so essentially you grow a plot of trees, right? And then those trees generate a certain number of credits. You can then sell those credits because you've got this plot of land, right? Now, the problem is that, say, in Australia, you've got a wildfire and that plot of trees is burnt down, but the carbon credits are still there. So, you're actually kind of using credits that are no longer valid. So I think because you got to imagine a lot of these carbon credits actually only mature over a very long time. And so we come up with these really creative accounting mechanisms to manage that. And I think there's so much room for gaming the system. So I reckon the best way to do it is for companies to actually take more of an influence within their scope of direct influence that they have within their energy consumption. So rather than saying, but I'm just going to kind of outsource my responsibility by just paying a bit of money, and then that legitimizes it. Now it's some other company's problem because they're in charge of making the credits real. I think there's a bigger trend now to take more ownership of the energy that we consume as organizations. We see like Amazon's got the climate pledge, which I think it's a $2 billion, I think it is, where we're investing these $2 billion into essentially companies that care about the planet and want to save the planet. And I think that's a much better approach.
Yeah, I'm working with one of the businesses actually that is working within that space. It's really the virtual power plant type idea and edge generation, because as I mentioned before, it's really inefficient to transport power around the country, although it's one of the easiest ways to do it and manage it. Where what you're saying, if you business, like every business generally has a peak and a trough, because when you're in the office, the business has to do stuff, it has to cool the building as well. And when no one's in it, it doesn't have to warm the building because it doesn't really care. It just has to keep it like, somewhat livable temperature. And where if you actually have solar panels and batteries powered as actually available there and generating power to actually, how to trim off that peak, that means that you can start, removing load from the grid. And also that means that vice versa, saying removing it from the more dirty sources, because generally most of the dirty sources come online as a response to peak need. So if you can actually help trim out that peak need and actually create much more stable base load, then overall you are creating a much better ecosystem. But that is really hard to do because, how much solar panel do you need to trim off your peak? Like how many battery storage do you need? Batteries are expensive and in themselves are also, double-edged sword because they're generally made out of cobalt or lithium, which in the process of creating them is quite a destructive task. So it's kind of like, how do we, where do we figure out and who's doing the blood math, so to speak, and to figure out if the battery and solar panel approach is better off than just that centralized, dirty approach, which is, it's a really interesting topic.
A lot in this space, though, right? Because to me, so you're bringing up the topic of essentially our individual, contribution to how to fix this climate situation and how do we reduce our own carbon footprint. Consuming less energy. So how can we generate green energy ourselves? Maybe by having solar panels on the roof and what have you. And then if we have too much consumption, can we feed that back in? And I don't know how realistic that is because I don't think we will ever generate enough power from the 3 solar panels that we've got on the roof. That's probably not going to work. But then I do think maybe there's an opportunity for our government here in New Zealand with the building code to say that every building must have 1 solar panel per person who's living in the building to make it a sustainable building, and that's required. So or at least kind of I don't know, how do you say, like subsidize, right, buying of solar panels and putting them on the roof in the same way that we see countries subsidizing electric vehicles, and you can buy a Tesla for crazy cheap in some countries and super mega expensive in others.
Yeah, and also you can use like unused farmland because there's quite often times you'd have fields that can't really be used for anything just because of either they're too steep or just not really particularly fertile. So there's also initiatives I know that around the world where the government will pay tax credits or something like that for that farmer to put solar panel generation there. And one of the bonuses of having that distributed model that we were talking about before is that the sun isn't always shining, exactly the same throughout the whole entire country. So if all of your solar panel generation is in the Waikato, for example, and Waikato is having a very cloudy day, well, you're having a very bad time with your solar panel generation for that area. So having it spread out all over the country means that you're generally taking all your eggs out of the same basket, so to speak. You're spreading that risk around, and also is much more local to that to the demand of that power. So even though it might be a little bit inefficient in certain ways, I get where you're going to there, but it's a lot more local. So I think you are making savings because of the fact that your loss of transmission is going down. And the cost, and also copper is not getting cheaper at all either.
So maybe the mega trend that we're kind of identifying here is that actually the companies are already accounting, or trying to account for their carbon footprint, but as individuals, as consumers and citizens of our countries, we're not yet. So maybe the mega trend is actually that we're going to move more into that space where we start accounting ourselves and being aware of our personal carbon footprint, and therefore then that encourages a change in behavior as individuals, not just saying, oh, but it's our company's responsibility to be green and clean and green, essentially. So,
and really,
I think there's going to be a shift there.
Oh, I moved up my camera, lost focus on me.
Definitely. On us. What's going on, man?
I'm losing focus in reality and in the digital world. But as individuals and companies at the end of the day are going to be pushed along in their sustainability needs by the end consumer at the end of the day. So as the end consumer, as us become much more of the forefront, then we'll be able to see that that realize, and government at the end of the day is always going to be the first one that really should be taking the first step, right? With the and we see it here as well with that announcement around was it all new vehicles for the government will be electric, and they're replacing the fleets with electric as well.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean that's really cool. I mean there needs to be more in that space, and I think New Zealand, I think we've probably been a bit laggard in that space. You know, like I remember years ago I went on a trip to Amsterdam, and we got off the airplane and grabbed a taxi, and the taxi was like this mega flash Tesla vehicle, and I was like, that's crazy. We barely have electric vehicles in New Zealand, and I mean, so I feel there's a lot more we need to do as New Zealanders to move more in that space. So it's really good to see the government's really catching up in that.
Yeah, and that's really just the role that IT plays in it, as we enable that the ability for our distributors to become more world class and have access to all of the network stacks, and enable that more edge generation, and really start bringing that to the forefront where you can start having schemes built around it. Then I think we'll see that probably in the next 2 to 5, 8 years we'll see much more of a push towards that, in my opinion. Just because ultimately that's where we kind of have to go as a country towards, have that innovation in IT and processes to really enable us as individuals and as companies to, to have true impact on that sustainability metrics, rather than, as you mentioned, the carbon credits that belong to a patch of trees that are probably going to be earmarked to be logged in about 5 years. So.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit sort of doom and gloom in that sort of space, but I genuinely hope, and this it's like we're having a bit of a yarn about stuff, so I hope that the carbon credits become less relevant and that we actually become more conscious of our own consumption and then therefore change our behavior. But that will only happen if we're also incentivized to change that behavior, because as humans, we're so driven by our incentives. One is you got to be aware if you're going in the wrong direction. If you're not, otherwise you're going to keep flying off the cliff kind of thing. So you got to be aware, but then you also got to be incentivized to behave differently. And I think that's where our government can come in and do quite a lot. But we do need to be, conscious as individuals as well.
Yeah,
cool. Do you want to grab another megatrend topic, or do you want to yarn about?
Yeah, I'm just checking to see if. Because I know that we do have a bunch of sustainability tools that we have announced recently that actually talks about a lot of that measurement of your footprint and carbon and whatnot. So yeah, there's definitely progress being made on that front.
Yeah, well, actually, we want to talk a little bit about widgets, kind of in our AWS space. I certainly with my customer base, I talk quite a bit about the customer carbon footprint tool, which has been introduced recently into the AWS console, so you can go in and check out. It's inside the I think it's part of the Cost Explorer. There's a category within there, and you can go and look at your carbon footprint usage. You can see how it changes and trends over time. And generally, what you'll find is that just sort of coming back to kind of like this tech angle, but you'll find that the more that you can compress the compute, so essentially increasing the how heavy your CPUs are loaded, the more they're loaded, the less wastage you have. The less wastage you have, the more efficient you're running, right? So therefore, you'll find that your carbon footprint generally for the same workloads will go down if you move more towards like a serverless world rather than sticking with an EC2 based world, especially when you're on one of the older CPUs. So that's definitely an area that I want to encourage our viewers to look into. Oh, someone's wanting the room. Oh, I think I'm going to be kicked out of the room, Casey. What is going on?
As I said, I bring this upon the world. Did you book the room? Because we have recently implemented that.
Room booking, man. That's another mega trend. I may have to go find another room. So give me 2 seconds. You might have to entertain the viewers for a second.
That's all good. I can actually go over and reiterate some of the things.
All right.
Go find a room. Hurry up. Run. Go for a run. Just to, as you mentioned, just because I noticed that we had a whole bunch of new viewers join. So this is from the field. We are a New Zealand, based show. So I'm based in Wellington, and Seb is also based in Wellington. We're both SAs in New Zealand, because I think there is actually Wellington and both Australia and the US, so I should be more specific about that. So we are both New Zealand based, and this one is more of an experience around, saying if the audience likes a more podcast type interactive approach, because quite often if you look at our last show, then we went down a much more of a engagement and presentation about a deep dive into Direct Connect, which is also a really awesome show that was done by Ratan. And it looks like we got Sid back. He has
Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't think I've ever booked a room here. Generally, they're available. Anyway.
Yeah, it just got implemented last week. Yeah, booking a room is the latest innovation we have.
I mean, facetious out there, man. That's got to be another mega trend in its own right. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and actually, that's really I want to say, those, you'd think that the whole meeting room thing as a cookie cutter approach has been solved, many times over, but where do you see you set yourself in the whole buy versus build type mentality and the limitations that you've experienced as a business owner in your previous life?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just by way of background there. So I ran a consulting company in the past with a friend of mine. We're based here in New Zealand called API Talent. We ended up being acquired into Deloitte, and then I left Deloitte and joined AWS directly. So it's kind of tangential because I wasn't running an enterprise. I was running a consulting company. So in general, the best way to approach it is if you can consume something as a service, then all the heavy lifting is done by a company that is specialized only in that. And so, I mean, at Amazon, we have this concept of undifferentiated heavy lifting, which is a phrase that gets brought up quite a bit. And I think it's the same concept when you look into enterprise software, right? It's like what is core to your specific DNA that makes your secret sauce, and that secret sauce you got to hold that really, really close. But actually, everything else, probably not, right? That if you can find someone that's going to do it more effectively and efficiently, then actually that's where the bar is, right? So the most effective and efficient and cheapest way that you can consume something like, I don't know, using payroll as an example, you probably don't want to run your own payroll software. You can consume that as a service, right? And you'd be crazy to think that that's somehow core. So when we focus on what actually matters to our organization, that is that secret kind of source. And I think there it's like how the question is kind of how do we scale that out, because that inherently is a build thing. Right, so buy everything that isn't core to your business and build those things that are core to your business. That's sort of how I split it up. And then I always recommend to my customers that you've got to ideally move up the stack as much as you can. So the more of the heavy lifting ops that you do, because you're running thousands of EC2 instances, so you're going to have to manage an army of operations specialists to maintain all of that. That's going to be super cost, it's going to cost you, it's going to be expensive essentially. So if you can move up the stack into managed services, into, containers, for example, running on Fargate, where the whole cluster is managed for you, or even higher up into a serverless space where actually you're just literally just deploying the code and you don't need to worry about anything else. That kind of where you get the most optimal use of your developers, where they just there to write code, write your secret sauce business logic, and not worry about any of this platform challenge. And I think that's the big scale challenge there.
That's also interesting because I have a few analogies of the alternate side where they were just sticking to EC2 because of the fact that they really needed that bare metal access to be the most cost efficient they need to have, since they there was a business of 5 people, and they were pretty much self-funded through doing contract work on the side. And this is a gaming studio type approach, so performance is king there. So they actually went the full other way. They actually built everything themselves. They even built their own orchestration and auto scaling logic, just completely by themselves, because they needed that level of control. Because they needed to make sure that they could recover from game sessions dropping, making sure that they could spin up and set up the servers to handle that and host those games.
Yeah, but look, I mean, to me that's just crazy, to be honest. So this sense that we must have control over absolutely everything. It comes at such a great cost, and at some point, where do you spill over? I think if you're trying to land a rover on Mars, you're going to need a heck of a lot of control, right? But
we landed on the moon with the power of a Monday calculator. So
yeah. yes. Well, look, I don't know, man. I mean, that's bizarre. I think that the way to scale out is actually to remove special snowflakes as much as possible and to have this cookie cutter approach that you've mentioned, right? So we try to build an environment that we can rinse and repeat, and essentially we just deploy our custom business logic and not having to worry about the rest, right? And the whole I think value proposition of serverless is that you're abstracted away from that. And yes, there comes an element of trust to that, right? But you give up something. There's something we said for strong opinions, essentially, I think, and inside AWS, we have so many different options you can choose. So depending on how strong your opinions are, you can find ways to implement those opinions yourself and make them your special custom opinions, or you can go and use our custom opinions. For example, AppRunner, is an incredible way of running containers, and it's the simplest way you can possibly do it, right? So is this a new podcast? Yeah, welcome to the show. It's a new style.
This is from the field. Quite often in the past, we've been doing a presentation type format, but now we've decided that we want to switch. We want to experiment with a podcast and see how you, the viewers, respond to this. And if it's good, then we might even do like 2 different types of shows. One that's a very podcast orientated, one that sticks with the educational content. But yeah, really, we always work backwards from you. So give us your opinion based on, do you like this podcast approach, or do you want to see much more of the previous stream, which is an educational and engagement stream where we went through deep dive through Direct Connect. So yeah, definitely give us your feedback on that front.
Cool. So I mean, look, we want to talk about mega trends here, and I think I've been in this industry for almost 20 years, and I've seen a number of times, or it's kind of we go through waves of where we try to bring non-developers to essentially build business logic in a graphical kind of way. And I think we breathe in on that idea and we explore it, and then we're like, oh, this is not a good idea. Let's go back. We need developers, right? And then we go back and we say, oh no, but low code, no code becomes like a theme again, right? And it does seem to be a resurgence. It kind of, I certainly have experienced it as it comes and goes again, right? And I think maybe we're actually back in the trend where low code is becoming popular again. And maybe that's actually a reflection on the skills that we have in market, right? And I mean, Casey, I'm curious, what's your view? I mean, we're in New Zealand, we're, and 2 islands, far away from everywhere, essentially. We're pretty isolated. I mean, do you reckon we have a tech challenge here, a tech talent challenge?
I think that while New Zealand does innovate in a lot of areas and we got a lot of potential there, I think that overall investment has been what our primary problem is, because at the end of the day, we are 2 islands on the end of the world chain, supply chain and also financial chain, really. We're at the beginning of it. If you think about agricultural progress and powerhouse, where generally I was a lot of investment in New Zealand isn't really we don't get a lot of overseas investment in New Zealand. We don't get a lot of people pushing us forward and say you need to be better, you need to achieve more. Where we do get a lot of investment is where we're already innovating, where we're already world leaders, such as our agri-tech background, our fertilizer compositions and all of that jazz, about people are actually trying to take and export away into another market, essentially. So we're getting investment where we're already good, but we're not really getting much investment even I'd say even in New Zealand ourselves externally, and that tech sector, so to speak. And I saw a graph in one of the papers I was reading where it has you're working smarter over here, and then over here is your axis of working harder and how that impacts your economy. And New Zealand, interesting enough, was right at the bottom here on the far side of working harder. So it's how New Zealand at the moment grows its economy by working harder. We throw people at the problem and said, we need to solve this use case. So rather than trying to make it something that's replicable and then, take that to market. We just go, okay, we'll just throw 10 people at it. We'll get the business analyst that has no idea anything about code as well, because we need someone to actually jump in there as an intermediate junior dev. And we'll go from there, where you have other countries that are on the extreme other side, but it's not also good, because ideally you want to be in the middle someplace, because you want to be working harder and smarter. And you have like Korea, which is on the complete opposite side, and they have some interesting things that are impacting their economy and innovation, because of the fact that they're working so smart rather than actually like having that harder part as part of it. So
I reckon they work pretty hard as well, though, right? I mean, I think
they do.
The success is that you work smart and hard, because quite frankly, if you work smart but not hard, someone else is going to work smart and hard, and they're going to outperform you.
So the key one there is indicator as impact on your national GDP. So if you add more people to the Korean economy, it won't actually help, because that's one of the big issues they have. They have too many people already, so they have whole generations that can't get a job, because they're one of the most educated people in like world, like in terms of
Casey, do you think that the fact that we're becoming more and more virtual, and we have a lot of remote workers now. In fact, I'd say, I mean, even though I'm in an office right now, that's a personal choice. I enjoy coming to the office, and I get to drop the kids off to school in the morning and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, most of us are actually remote workers. So does it matter? Like, does it matter that I'm in New Zealand or that I'm not in New Zealand, right? Because we used to argue that, well, COVID's hit, we're no longer able to bring tech talent into New Zealand, but that doesn't matter, because surely, we can hire people from anywhere in the world, actually, right? And I mean, I don't mean we as Amazon, but we as anyone in any company out there in the world that's looking for major tech talent, you actually have a much broader options. Your hiring is going to be much broader.
And even if you take the world out of it, like being remote, even in the context of New Zealand, some of the smartest people I actually met in IT weren't in Auckland, they weren't in Wellington, and they weren't even in Christchurch. They're in Hawke's Bay, Tauranga. They're like in these random parts, like Dunedin. I've been talking to some really smart people in like Nelson and Blenheim and stuff like that. What a big, hubs in terms of IT in New Zealand, but compared to like the three major cities, they're tiny, and that means they're tiny and compared to the world as well. So I think even like New Zealand companies have been a little bit more relaxed in terms of you don't have to be in Auckland because you're an Auckland company. Why don't you start hiring the regional talent we have that is there and they're really, really amazing, and then start looking overseas to Australia and Europe and Singapore and all of those other countries that again they will bring their own extra, as you call it, like their little key success and their experiences, and start pulling that back over to New Zealand to innovate.
Yeah, so I mean, I reckon it doesn't even matter where you're located anymore. The key thing is that you're able to connect, remotely. I think that becomes harder though, and one of the challenges with that is actually building a relationship with as individuals, and actually, getting to know people properly. I think that's a really big challenge that we have, because there, some of the early models that I saw a couple of years ago where companies were trying to go full remote or full virtual, they still put an emphasis on making sure that they got together, every couple of months, wherever they were, they'd fly in and they'd go and have, some team building. I feel it's harder to build a connection with someone where you're comfortable picking up the phone and calling someone, hey, I'm stuck on this piece of code. Can you help me with this? Right. Yeah. If I can't feel comfortable calling someone, right? And then on top of it is, of course, I'm busy. I've got no time. So, I need to make sure that I know the person, and I want to, I empathize with the fact that that person's got issues and I know them. And so I'm going to pick up the phone and put on the extra effort. And I find we become a little bit too impersonal at times, right? So I would like to see our industry moving towards more of a hybrid thing. So rather than you're either, full virtual or you're full on-site, and I think the full on-site's gone anyway, but now you're full virtual kind of thing. I don't think that's enough. You got to have team offsites or team building activities. And I think the offsites are probably the one that we're going to see more and more of.
Yeah, it's something that doesn't really replace the ability to have, that drink or that lunch with a coworker too, and you also get a lot of your venting frustration, and also your like problem solving through those type of interactions, where you're just venting, and then the other person goes, "Oh, I've actually experienced that in the past. What you really, have you thought about it this way and this way and this way?" And it starts opening the doors. Or as for a casual conversation with someone, they're like, "Oh, actually, I know someone that exists within that ecosystem or that problem space, and then I can connect you with them." I think that virtual really stops the organicness, because if you've ever been in a group chat room, and this is where I would say that I definitely am never a fan of a full remote workplace, but like one that, as you mentioned, that gets together, once every 6 months or 3 months, stuff like that, semi-regularly, where that can still happen. But a full one where you never ever meet anyone, I, in my opinion, think that's maybe I'm not introverted enough for it, and that is just completely my my personality type. But I do quite like having that personal connection, because, as I was saying before, if you've ever been in a room, like a group meeting room, like with 10 other people doing voice chat, it's very, very hard to have those concurrent conversations, because if someone's talking, they are occupying their only audio line, where in person I can be talking to you, Jim and Terry can be talking to themselves, Vanessa and etc. can be talking amongst themselves, and you can have like 3 or 4 different conversations, and quite often I'll find myself jumping between conversations as I hear someone saying something interesting or very controversial, and I just need to jump in there and actually offer my 2 cents before jumping out again, or planting some seeds of discontent and distrust.
As you do, Casey. Coincidental, we're both here in Wellington. I don't know, I'm not quite sure where you live, but I mean, maybe you're like 20 kilometers away from me now, or probably no more than that, and yet we're both connected virtually. It's interesting. But I mean, there's going to be less water cooler talk. I think we're missing out on that. So yeah, it's an interesting space. I think it's going to evolve quite a lot. Early stages, like I remember I'm tracking a couple of companies a couple of years ago before I joined Amazon, when I was having my own company, and I was thinking like, well, so how do you do this remote working thing? And some companies were like, if you were working, you had to have your camera on all the time, so that essentially people felt more connected, or you'd have to join in and you'd have to say how you're feeling today, or what have you. And I mean, that doesn't work for me, man. That's like Big Brother type stuff going on, and
it can be abused.
Definitely. So there's a lot of room for abuse in that kind of space, and there's some, if you Google that, there's some crazy stories out there. But yeah, it's essentially one. Look, I think ultimately what we're trying to solve is a scale problem. We're trying to find the best possible top talent. I think we're no longer limited to where that is in the world, because we can fly around again now. It's become a bit easier again, so we can meet in person, but we're still going to have that struggle to find that top talent. And so as we scale out our workforce, we're naturally going to have a greater proportion of junior people coming in, and they can still be top talent, but they're just by their nature going to be more junior, because there's just going to be more of them, and they're new entrants to the market. And I think that's where this low code thing, just coming back to that briefly, because I do think that's like a re-emergence of a mega trend there that we're seeing now. I don't know if you've seen the Honeycode service that we have at Amazon. That's interesting. Unfortunately, I haven't spent much time playing with it, but I understand that that's kind of like a low code solution. We can build web applications really, really quickly. So I think there's going to be more in that kind of space.
But you have a lot of them already. Like you got like Squarespace and that and that little space. There's a couple others as well. I think Shopify even have their little own user interface to build like a basic website, and also offer that whole hosting solution. Going to the far side of like a business owner doesn't really have any idea on how to actually build a custom website from scratch.
Yeah. So does that mean, Casey, that actually the ultimate destination for any business problem is a SaaS ISV type solution, where you just consume it, you just configure your rules into it? That would be an interesting one to think through in more detail. I need to do that. But I guess ultimately, the most up the stack is you just configure. You no longer code anything, and it's just delivered as a SaaS solution. So maybe that's ultimately where we'll end up.
Yeah, but I think there's a time and place for such solution, like why they do occupy a large segment of it. I think there's been recent, news and mockery of certain companies that have been trying to, get into that SaaS market in a way that is, in my opinion, not entirely sensible. I won't, because this is a public forum, I won't name and shame, but I think a lot of people know who I'm pointing to.
Yeah.
But also we have a question of like what low code options do we have for AI ML? Because that is also another space where even like very experienced, very senior devs, like AI ML is a completely different world, a completely different skill set and tool set that you need to have.
That's like a super interesting one, actually. Wowie, thanks for asking the question. So there is developments in this space as well. I believe SageMaker Canvas is one that you can look at, and you'll find that there's a big trend, I think, here with inside ML. It's, I guess, mega trends is the topic of the day. So there's definitely a mega trend to make the machine learning models available to developers via API, so you don't have to be a data scientist. So essentially the data scientists are kind of like abstracted away from you, but they're still there building the models. So you create a kind of like a graphical representation of your machine learning flow, your training flow that you have. That there's going to be a lot more development in that space. And I think especially with inside the ML ops space, where you need to look at how you retrain your models, when you retrain your models, how do you monitor your models, and all of that aspect to it. That's going to become a lot more graphical and a lot more business centric, because ultimately we're actually trying to solve a business problem, and that's what it's all about. So so that's a good. I reckon you check out SageMaker Canvas in that space, Wowie. I think actually across the board, we're seeing more of this low code stuff happening in many other places as well. Like I said Honeycode, the SageMaker Canvas. We had the whole sort of Del Boomi graphical thing. There's all that kind of stuff going on. I personally, I believe that the best way to do it is to write code. It's concise, it's efficient. But then I'm a developer background, and the only way to scale out truly with more and more individuals that don't have a computer science background like myself will be to make it more accessible to people who aren't as techie as me.
I think it's also the whole question of understanding the problem and the return on investment from it. So something like, even as I was like from my dev background, it's always about understanding the ROI of the project you're working on, because there's lots and lots of best practices in the world, but not all of them need to be applied to the fullest extent of the law for every single problem. Because if it's an internal product and it's only going to be used by like 5 people every week or something like that, then it doesn't need to have any type of scale attached to it. It just needs to exist in some way or form in the cheapest possible way that meets their needs. Like, I'm not going to over-engineer that and set up a whole entire DevOps pipeline for it. Well, we'll have a DevOps pipeline, but it won't be all the bells and whistles. It'll be the most simplest one I can implement.
Yeah, and by the way, the simplest is the one with the most pre-baked opinions that are already out of the box that you can just go and adopt, right? That generally simplifies it, because it makes the complexity well known, I think. And so therefore, essentially, it abstracts it away. But another way is that simple things tend to be the same every single time, right? So if you're going to build your CI/CD pipeline in a different way every single time, it's going to be incredibly difficult to work with it. But if you can just have essentially an out of the box, this is how it does. You commit your code into Git, and boom, your Docker container is deployed into AWS App Runner. That is cool, right? That is the easiest possible way to do it, and I don't have to bring in crazy complex CI/CD skills and talk about flow metrics and all sorts of DevOps type stuff that's out there. Hey, I just see Casey. I just want to make sure you saw that. I would love to see a stream on ML Ops.
We always want our viewers' opinion on what they want to see and what they want to hear from us next, because we do have generally a 2-month schedule of the next content. And if people say I really want to hear about this particular content, then that means I can rearrange people and bring that particular content forward, and then the content that hasn't been asked for back. So it's a very dynamic in the background. But it is definitely something that, talking about the email stuff is definitely something that's, quite hot at the moment. I guess it's also been talked about in a lot of board meetings, and, to see CEO and that level. So, there's a few complexities that also come from that. But, we definitely want to hear from it and actually, go over ops to various levels that, we do cater to. Because as mentioned before, we cater to the very developer focus that doesn't have really much of a background in ML, but still give them a fair amount of power. And then you go and also cater all the way to the data scientist that's been doing it for the last 15 years. They're doing it back. They start every sentence with back in my day, we didn't have these fancy tools. So we're definitely working on that front.
Hey, cool. We got another good question here, Casey. I'm just seeing it in the chat. What no-code, low-code successes or failures do you believe we can learn from to build better ones for the future? I might give it a quick stab. I think that one's actually super interesting. I think where I've seen it go wrong is when we try, and I'm specifically thinking about a BPM type solution, right? So business process management. And BPM, that's the classic one where generally we're targeting business users. But then we introduce you need to specify this HTTP method to go and call out to some API in the background. Suddenly you're confusing the business layer and the business skill set with this tech skill set that has to happen below the actual business process. So for example, in a business process, you're calling out to all these different sub actions, and each one of those happens to be an API call. So now it's oh my goodness, you need to configure API keys and TLS configurations and choose all of the security kerfuffle and what have you. That is not going to work for a business user. And I think where we've gone wrong with the low code options is when we mix those domains together. So if you're going to go low code, then make sure you keep it low code and don't try to, branch out into crazy complex drop-down boxes where you have to configure complicated tech type stuff. I think that's the biggest one where we're wrong. Yeah, keep it simple, right? Keep it to that business domain language.
Yeah. The other one I see it being very successful is there's I think Building Blocks or whatever it's called, the one that has been used in schools now to help build games and teach kids the whole basics of programming. So that's called?
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is, but it's been quite successful. There's been quite a few games that have actually gone viral and they've made quite a bit of money off it. So even
there was one from Microsoft that I've forgotten now. I helped my daughter with it a couple of months ago. She had an assignment from school. It even has branch outs to physical IoT type devices and stuff. There's some cool stuff happening in that space. And I think that is still aimed as still kind of techie, you're not aimed at a business user because they're kids, and the kids want to have some fun, but they tend to still be sort of code.
Yeah, but it's successful in what it's trying to achieve, right? It's because for a game and a learning platform, it's very successful as a low code. Because at the end of the day, it's just dragging and dropping bits and doing a bit of configuration. You don't have that much wider control.
Yeah, you can probably only get so far from a code kind of perspective, I think. We had this trend, I think it's disappeared a little bit, but there was this, or maybe it hasn't become topical in my own kind of career most recently, but we had this whole idea of this sort of 360 architecture, right, where you would essentially you'd diagrammatically create this architecture, and then it would generate the code. So for example, it could generate some CloudFormation behind the scenes, and then you go and deploy the CloudFormation. But if the architecture changed, you could go and essentially change the code, and it would refresh the diagram. You had kind of this synchronization between the diagram and the code. You could go back and forth and resynchronize them and what have you. I don't see too much of that happening anymore. I think we had, that must be an area that's going to come back at some point.
I've experienced that side of things in a production setting. It was incredibly painful because generally it worked well until you had to add your little custom secret source to it, or a customer asked for a specific workflow or approach, and that's when for me that's when it broke down. Like it's fine when you're having like as we mentioned before, that cookie cutter approach, but as soon as you get that snowflake that comes in and be like, I want to do it this way, you're like yeah, about that.
Where it works, I'm just thinking of like an example. The one that comes to mind now is inside CloudFormation. When you're in the CloudFormation console, like just for those that maybe want to go a little bit deeper into there's actually a CloudFormation visualizer, and that thing's actually surprisingly good. And the thing is that we always write the CloudFormation IDEs and what have you, and or text editors, and then run it through the CLI. But actually, inside the console, the CloudFormation visualizer is actually pretty awesome, and it does do the synchronization. So you can edit the CloudFormation text and refresh the diagram. That one's really cool, and I'd love to.
I forgot about
more of that happening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things where I've just gone down the infrastructure as code route so heavily. I just forgot that even exists, and I've had played around with that. Well, like we are running out of time, so I want to segue into really the other side of the last thing that I do for every single stream. And do I add your opinion here, Seb? Where if I will just show this lovely little slide here, is about training the certification. Like everywhere and everyone I talk to, like finding cloud-enabled people, it's just so difficult. Like it is nearly impossible to get a cloud engineer that has experience or even has certifications, so he can prove that he knows what he's talking about. And this is really what this whole thing about is like trying to bring this to the wider dev audience and be like just going through a skill builder and learning a new section of AWS or like a new job, because you can do it by technology or by role. Where if you go, I want actually to learn more about DevOps and how that's performed within the cloud, then you can actually go there and it will give you a curriculum, so to speak, of where you can go through and actually learn on the fly. And if you are like me, and you find it very, very hard to set time aside to do that learning yourself, then on the left-hand side, convince your boss that they should pay for someone to come in and upskill you as a team, because I find that is actually the most effective way of doing training within an organization. Is you just bring someone in and essentially say, you have to go sit in that room because we just spent a whole bunch of money getting this person in to talk to you, so you have to. And then segueing into that is at the bottom there, you get a 50% off discount to our getting a certification. So this is for Australia and New Zealand only. If you're outside those two countries, then unfortunately that won't work unless you want to fly to one of our two countries and then take the exam. Which might actually end up being more expensive. But if you ever want to, have a holiday or anything like that, and also do an exam at the same time, might be great. I'm also have terrible vacation plans, if you haven't noticed.
Oh my goodness, Wellington's the coolest place. Come to Wellington. Both Casey and I are from Wellington, and so mega plug for Wellington. We have a saying that Wellington is the coolest little capital in the world, and it certainly is probably the most littlest capital in the world. I reckon we're pretty cool. We got a pretty awesome culture here, so yeah. Come visit.
Yeah, definitely. And those again, those certificates do help a lot. So on that bombshell, I say we're going to have to jump off quickly. But thank you, Seb, a lot for being on this the podcast experiment and broadcasting your opinions and your views and your experience to the world. And hopefully, all of our audience here has picked up something, learned, and actually have thought about something.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Casey.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everyone, and Matiwa.